Our reading this morning is a poem by the Palestinian-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye, and it's called Shoulders. Shoulders. A man crosses the street in rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south, because his son is asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him. No car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most precious cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say, "Fragile, handle with care." The man's ear fills up with breathing. He hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be wide. The rain will never stop falling. I first fell in love with this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye when my son Nico was a toddler. And I'd often carry him in my arms or push him in a stroller through the streets of our city. Whenever we crossed the street, I'd look both ways, not once, but twice, just like the father in the poem. And I would glare at any driver that cut a corner too close or ran a stop sign and put my little boy or even his shadow in danger. Yes. And now Nico's 13, and I still walk him to school most mornings. Not quite ready to give up that ritual yet. And to this day, when we approach an intersection, I look twice, and I remind him to look too, and he says, "I know, Papa, you already told me." And I still put out my little brake hand to prevent him from stepping into, the crosswalk. And yes, I still glare at drivers who come too close. I'm gonna shout at them and the world, "This is my child, the most fragile and precious cargo. Please, please, handle with care." What parent hasn't made that plea? I was reminded of this poem and these feelings when, over the course of last summer, not one, but 3 cyclists were killed right here on the streets of Cambridge. Remember last summer? Yeah. One of those killed was Min T. Win, a 24-year-old graduate student at MIT. Someone's precious child. Struck and killed in Kendall Square when a 10-ton box truck traveling down Hampshire Street failed to notice her when making a right. Speaking at a vigil to mourn her death, a local pastor asked everyone to please take greater care with one another. She said, "We are all just people trying to make it home alive." Indeed. Friends, we are packed tightly into this small, beautiful city of Cambridge. We encounter one another regularly at complicated and busy intersections. Pedestrians, drivers, cyclists, scooters, folks in wheelchairs, the elderly, children, wild turkeys, for crying out loud. Right? And few of us are looking out for one another because we're looking at our phones. And few of us are listening for one another because we've got our earbuds in. And some of us are in a rush, and some of us are in a rage, and we don't take care of one another. Since last summer's spate of traffic deaths, I've found that I can no longer restrain my protective Papa Bear instincts when I'm walking in the streets of Cambridge. If I see someone in harm's way, I'll blurt out, "Ooh, careful!" Or I'll put up that brake hand for a complete stranger who's about to step into oncoming traffic. And I'll admit that I've gotten some strange looks. But like the poet says, we're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what the Father in this poem is doing with one another. Fragile. Handle with care. But for me, the carelessness on our streets is indicative of a larger and more troublesome phenomenon. Is it just me, or does it feel to you like our world is becoming a more coarse and hardened and uncaring place? I'll say it, a meaner place. You know, in March, we marked the 5th anniversary of the outbreak of COVID. And lots of folks took stock of how things have changed since the pandemic. One of the most thoughtful reflections I read was a piece by David Walker Wallace Wells, in the New York Times called "How COVID Remade America." It's difficult to listen to his conclusions, but for me they ring true. He writes, "America is a harsher place now. More self-interested, more nakedly transactional, more abrasive and rapacious, and shaped nearly everywhere by a barely suppressed rage." I see that rage out there, and I feel it sometimes too. We barely trust one another, he continues, and are less sure that we owe our fellow Americans anything, let alone the rest of the world. We tell ourselves we've moved on and hardly talk about the disease or all the people who died or the way the trauma and tumult have transformed us, but COVID changed everything, and we still have not reckoned with all that we've lost. And I would add, we still have not grieved all that we've lost. The burst of mutual care and solidarity that characterized our initial response to the pandemic withered over time into loneliness and isolation. For months, we barely left our homes. Many of us still haven't returned regularly to our workplaces. And along the way, says Wallace Wells, we came to see one another as intruders in our lives. At best, an inconvenience. At worst, a threat. Someone who could make us sick and die. And a politics arose to capitalize on this mood, right? An angry populism that tapped into our rage and suspicion and pitted us against one another. A politics that scapegoats the vulnerable and blames the other and the outsider. A politics that is gleefully mean-spirited and cruel and destructive. And we are right to respond to this political movement and moment with marches and protests and calls for justice. But an ethic of justice alone won't get to the heart of the matter, I don't believe. Our ethic of justice must be coupled with an ethic of care. Care for one another, care for life. We're not going to fix our politics if we don't first repair the fabric of basic human care and concern that since the pandemic has become frayed and tattered. What do I mean? What does that look like? How do we do this? I think it begins with one word: fragile. An ethic of care begins with an acknowledgement of our shared vulnerability as human beings. An ethic of care begins with our ability to see one another not as intruders or aliens or threats, but as brothers and sisters and siblings. Like us, mortal and vulnerable. Like us, precious and precarious. Like us, fragile and worthy of care. Yet this sense of shared vulnerability was perhaps the greatest and most ironic casualty of the pandemic. David Wallace Wells points out that a pandemic, by definition, renders all of us vulnerable. And this shared predicament could have yielded a great solidarity. But instead, it has fueled a rising social Darwinism, a belief in the survival of the fittest. Because it was too frightening for many of us to acknowledge just how vulnerable we were, we told ourselves that only some of us were vulnerable. Those with underlying conditions, those with comorbidities or vaccine hesitancy, and a subtle, perhaps subconscious discourse of blame emerged. Some of us may have even allowed ourselves to feel a little virtuous for having avoided the worst of the disease. You see, the mind plays tricks on us to keep us from acknowledging our shared vulnerability. But here's the thing: if we can't acknowledge the fragile part of fragile, handle with care, then we'll never get to the handle with care part. Because one follows the other. Once we do acknowledge our shared vulnerability, though, then I believe care comes almost naturally to us. If we're truly able to see another, once this bond of solidarity is felt, it's easy for us to imagine doing what the father in the poem does, looking out for one another, helping one another navigate the sometimes dangerous crossroads on life's journey, handling one another with care. God, the world is a complicated place. And ours is a very complicated moment, but in some ways, friends, an ethic of care is simple and clear and straightforward. There's a story from the lives of the saints that for me illustrates the clarity of this ethic of care. St. Kevin was a 6th century Irish monk who lived for many years as a hermit. And every day Kevin would pray in a small hut out in the woods with palms up and arms outstretched. But the hut was so small that with his arms outstretched, at least one of his hands would poke out the open window of his tiny hut. Legend has it that one day, while he was deep in prayer, a blackbird landed in one of Kevin's outstretched palms. And finding the saint's palm warm and inviting, the bird built a nest there and laid its eggs. When Kevin awoke from his contemplation, he noticed the bird and its nest. And not wanting to harm the life that was growing there, he kept his arm outstretched until those baby birds hatched and flew away. What does this story suggest to us? Does it suggest that we hold one another's well-being in the palm of our hands? I think it does. Does it suggest that a practice of care flows naturally from a practice of contemplation and mindfulness, from clarity of thought and purpose? I think it does. Does it suggest that sometimes an ethic of care can place a strain on us? As someone who recently had rotator cuff surgery, I can't stop of thinking of poor St. Kevin's shoulder, holding that nest up. An ethic of care can place a strain on us. Does it suggest that sometimes an ethic of care will keep us from doing all the things that we should be doing, all the things on our to-do list? I think so. How many days did it take for those blackbird chicks to fledge? Sometimes care needs to be the only thing on our to-do list. Sometimes we sit at the dinner table a little while longer to listen to the long story our child wants to tell us. Sometimes we remain at the hospital bedside until that very last drop of our friend's chemo is administered. Sometimes we sit with the person who's fallen in the square and accompany them until the first responders arrive. And so we stretch our hearts. And like St. Kevin, we stretch out our arms and widen the circle of our solidarity and our embrace. And yes, we hold one another's well-being in the palm of our hands. Is it as simple as that? It isn't, and it is. Fragile. Handle with care. Amen.